Stacy and I decided to take a break after she told us her 3 birth stories. She went really in depth. We connected a few thoughts back to fitness, which was our goal for a whole episode, but we didn't know that we would go as deep as we did. So if you didn't listen to that episode, go back and listen to it because I think it's great. And whether you're listening to it for the purpose of the birth stories, great. If you're looking for those tidbits of fitness, they're in there. So check it out. Because now what I want to do is kind of like really move to the future and give Stacy a chance to tell us what Victress is so that we can then dive into what makes it so cool and special. So Stacy, thank you so much for taking another day to talk to me and and do a 2-part episode, which was not part of the original deal.
It wasn't. I'm humbled to be able to. I love talking about, like I told you after we finished recording, like it was very cathartic to like have a conversation about those births. It's a healing process, I think, for a lot of different ways every time you tell it. So It was fun to talk about that and the way that it ties into, what I'm doing and what we're doing here as a team now. So
yeah, and I think you shared some really valuable information with people. There's something to be said for hearing multiple birth stories from the same person, I think, because so many people only have 1 or 2 babies, and 1 or 2 babies is not enough to talk about a pattern, right? And you know something about yourself from having 3. Long story, I won't get into it. I won't take up our time, but people who have been listening to the show probably heard me say, I used to work with a population of people who are known for having large numbers of babies. And so I, as a midwife, got to see a lot of real, true patterns. And so I try to impart that wisdom upon people when they're trying to figure things out. Like, there are things we won't know because you're not going to have 16 babies, right? Like, we're just never going to know. Yes. I think there's some really interesting information in there that is unique to a situation where somebody has 3 kids as opposed to somebody telling a single birth story. With that said, moving forward, let's just jump right in. Tell us how your empowering birth experiences led you to build this company and tell us what it is.
Yeah. So, like I said before, I think that birth always gives you what you need, not always what you want. And at the end of that, final birth, I just had this very internal shift, this internal realization about myself, about the world around me, around women's health, obviously very specific to prenatal postpartum time period. I took my time being very intentional with my postpartum recovery, and which we can go into a whole nother conversation on that. But I really was very intentional about the way that I recovered my body, specifically postpartum. And then I just had to pay it forward. It's one of those things that when something changes you so deeply and you feel like such a different person, through an outcome maybe that you weren't expecting or you knew was going to be good, but you had no idea how good it could be. I really just wanted to pay that experience forward and make an impact on the women and the communities around me in that way. So I really dove into prenatal postpartum specific fitness. Again, at the time I was not a trainer. Ended up working at a e-commerce company in their IT or in their customer service experience department. I was working noon to 10, Tuesday through Saturday. I was barely seeing my kids, at the time. So obviously I took time off postpartum and then I went back to that job. But it was definitely just this mission within me of I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know if I even have the resources to do this, but I want to learn and I want to grow, and be a resource for women. So, I I aligned with BirthFit. I think I mentioned that before in the previous episode. I became a BirthFit coach for them. Just went to their BirthFit coach series. At the same time, I started pursuing just a bunch of different certifications in regards to fitness, just so that I could serve it well. Again, I've always had a really innate and natural eye for movement. Even without that formal training, not necessarily understanding what muscles were working and why, but understanding that looked right and that did not look right. And I don't know why. So I really leaned on that in those early stages of coaching. And I think BirthFit kind of saw something in me within that way too. Just from a movement perspective, being very intentional and very strong advocate for quality movement pattern in the prenatal postpartum time period. So I started taking clients on. So I had my son in June. I took my first client on in January as a prenatal postpartum specific coach only, out of another CrossFit gym here in town. I just took clients in their back room and started just growing very slowly. Again, I was working crazy hours, so I would take my kids to school and daycare, and then be in the gym from 9 to 11, and then go to work and be at work until 10 o'clock at night. So it was a very grueling, not great time in my life in that regard, but I really wanted to serve women as best as I could and do what I loved alongside what I had to do. And at the time, I had a client reaching out consistently. She just kept hounding me, and I'm like, I do not have the capacity. I had 2 clients at the time. I really couldn't take any more than 2. It was just not possible. But she was very persistent, very consistent, and finally I agreed to meet with her. And she ended up, I found out she was 8 weeks pregnant, but also 8 months postpartum. So our sons were born a month apart, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to, I have to, there's no not helping this woman, because literally I'm kind of her best shot at, a quality movement pattern. And she had a pretty traumatic first birth, and she just wanted things to go differently. So I agreed to take her on. And, we started having conversations consistently. And one day I woke up, burning a candle at both ends. I'm like, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot maintain my full-time job anymore. I just can't. I was going to work and crying. I was miserable. So I walked in my boss's office and said I was done, and I was done by the end of the day. And I knew in that moment, it was going to take a sacrifice on myself, on my family, from my kids, but I knew that whatever was between my ears and within my heart mattered, and it needed to get out into the world in some capacity. I never in my wildest dreams thought it would like turn into what it is now or what it's evolving into, but I just knew it mattered enough, and I knew I needed to be the person to make it happen. Me as like that vessel of this mission. So I came to our session with that client and I was like, okay, I quit my job. So if you want to bump up your sessions, like we could do 4 times a week, or, you know, whatever you want to do, because I have more flexibility. But I had committed to myself, like, to turn learning into my full-time job at that point. Like, beyond just training, I was going to learn and put my hands on anything and everything that I could get my hands on, and really creating a product that now exists within, you know, the 4 walls of Victress. But she was like, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I think I'm going to do this. You know, I think I'm going to train women and, you know, make this my thing. And she's like, well, do you know what I do? And I'm like, nope, I thought you were a stay-at-home mom, to be honest with you. And she's like, no, like I'm a small business consultant. Like I help with new business startups, all that stuff. And I was like, oh, well, that sounds like something I probably need. And so through her consulting me, and helping me, you know, just like set up an EIN and set up an LLC and like doing all of those things that like I had no idea about. She really guided me through that. And the concept of Victress was kind of just like born through our sessions of like us having conversations, as we're meeting, you know, 3-4 times a week as she's working out. And I eventually just like got to a place where I was getting really, really busy. It wasn't just 6 weeks postpartum, 8 weeks postpartum. It was 7 years postpartum women that are coming with the same concerns that they had at 6 weeks postpartum. They're like, I still have coning in my abdominal muscles, or I still have diastasis recti, or I still have pelvic floor issues, or I still have like all of these lingering things from a postpartum perspective that just kept sticking around. And so my demographic just like organically started to grow as far as like the women that I was serving. And I started to get really busy. So I started implementing small group models. And then as it grew, she was like, you need to have your own space. Like, you have to get your own space. You have to do this on your own. You can do this. And I'm like, at the time, again, I had just quit my job. I'm not making any money. I have no financial means. I'm a recovering single mom. There was no financial capacity at that time in my life. And fortunately for me, she was very bought in on me and very bought in on this mission, and very bought in, and in a stage of life that she had the opportunity to financially take that risk on me. And so she ended up investing and opening, this space that is now across the driveway from us. And we opened brick and mortar Victress in and of itself in May of 2019. And it has grown from obviously that prenatal postpartum specific stage to really, like I said, organically, women demographic just started to increase. So as the need started to grow, I committed to learning more and more and more. So then it went young athlete, and then it went, post-menopause, and it's just continued. And general women's fitness, preconception, postconception, whatever it may be. I don't want to identify women on whether or not they're going to have a baby, but just overall women's fitness. So that's how it started. And it's just continued to grow and evolve from there. Right now we have 3 locations, obviously all within the Lincoln, Nebraska, Omaha area. But we've got Des Moines and Boise, Idaho now coming down the pipe too. So it's definitely obviously continuing to grow. So
that's incredible. I mean, I'm so impressed with what you've done. I also, in a very different storyline and way, when I decided I was ready to step away from full-time, full-scope midwifery, it was with the intention of starting something very much like what you are doing. And I did start building that in New Orleans. And I was well on my way. I was running these group classes that were very mixed because I didn't have quite enough volume to separate out yet the prenatal from the postpartum. So it would be very cool. It was like, I'm holding one baby, someone else is holding a baby, we're switching babies, other people are pregnant, and we just made it work, right? I'm just walking around the room busy the whole time, helping everybody figure out their modifications that are appropriate for them. But then the pandemic hit, just bad timing, right? But I've kept up working with people online, and I am amazed at how much help I'm able to provide just in the early phase by having somebody roll out their yoga mat and set up their computer or phone. We're working on breathing. We're working on double unders, whatever it is, whatever that trigger is, we're working on it online with just try this, try that, this cue, that cue. And it's so much more helpful than I would have imagined. But that model where I was with people in a space felt so good. And I'm so happy to hear your story be the ultimate of what I could have ever imagined for myself in that realm. I'm just my heart's bursting for you. It's so beautiful.
Well, COVID was a real thing, that's for sure. I'm very grateful. I mean, that was not in our business plan. That was not in our model. We ended up closing for 3 months. It was 1 year. We opened in March of 2019, and March of 2020 is when the world shut down, right? So it was definitely not on our radar in any capacity. I don't think it's been on anybody's radar. Sure. But she was super smart. Like I said, we've kind of joked, she's the business, I'm the fitness. And she was super smart in regards to negotiating with our landlords and, creating different revenue streams. Our members were amazing. A lot of them continued to pay, a lot of them, but we had a model of dropping down. Everybody did what was best for them and navigating the best way. Went virtual for quite a while. We rented out equipment, so I programmed virtually. I joke I have PTSD on Zooms, to be honest, because of the amount of times that I was on Zooms during COVID. But yeah, I mean, I am very grateful for her insight and leadership, navigating owning a gym during a metabolic based disease is not easy in any capacity. So I'm very grateful that we came out the other end and, have just continued to grow during and after. So
amazing. Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10.5 hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving, and let's improve postpartum care together. Okay, so I would love it if you would dive in a little bit to what it is that makes your training methodology unique.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of like women only gyms, I think, out there. There's a lot of women only programming or women focused programming. There's a lot of not women specific that are targeted towards women in regards to fitness gyms or programming or anything else in that regard. I think universally what we know about women right now in regards to the recommendations being really loud is the benefits of strength training. I think the world has caught on to that pretty loud and clear. Back in 2019, though, like that was still fairly like, do I not? Like, am I going to get bulky? Like that type of conversation. I do feel like that conversation is starting to like kind of go away, and not go away completely, but it's starting to die down. And, so our methodology, number one, is like based on the intentional strength training in every stage of life. So the importance of strength training, whether you are a young girl going through puberty all the way up until you are a woman in postmenopause, the intensity should be different. The, appropriateness of certain movements are going to shift and change. The rep schemes might look different. All of those things should change and shift, but at the foundation is strength training, right? Like we know that strength training is important. So like I said, our methodology is first and foremost based on strength training. The progressive overload model of strength training is a huge component of what we do also with every stage of life. So being able to take a client from point A to point B based on increasing your reps, increasing your sets, increasing your weight, increasing your range of motion, increasing the difficulty, whatever it is we take that structured, consistent, progressive overload methodology in all of our training cycles.
Can you just pause and define progressive overload for our audience? We've done it on previous episodes, but I don't want to assume everyone has heard those particular episodes.
Yeah, no, progressive overload is essentially, you could say like the very sciencey version, but essentially progressive overload is taking a client or taking a certain movement from point A to point B in a strategic, consistent, repetitious pattern of increasing, again, whether we're increasing a weight, whether we're increasing the amount of reps, or we're increasing the level of intensity or like the skill set involved in the movement. Mm-hmm. So essentially, let's use back squat, for example. If I have a client or a member coming in and we know that her, approximate 2 rep max of a back squat is 100 pounds, our goal is with a certain amount of reps and a certain amount of sets. It may change based on what cycle we're in, if we're trying to put on muscle size, if we're trying to just build strength, if we're trying to increase muscle endurance. But the goal is to consistently put a little bit more weight on the bar every time she gets to the bar. Not necessarily in that day, not necessarily week to week, but from point A to point B in the next 8 weeks, our goal is to slowly start to increase the load, or we could increase the amount of reps. We're going to stick with 100 pounds, but now we're going to go from 6 reps to 8 reps, or we're going to get you from 8 reps to 10 reps. That's a longer version of like essentially what progressive overload is, but it can feel boring. It can feel like I keep doing the same things over and over. Every Monday I am squatting. But the beauty behind that is like actually how we increase the strength and quality of the muscle itself, and increase the quality and output of the strength that the client is wanting to gain from the process.
No, so I think that's a really great way of explaining it without like you got rid of that sciencey component. I think the only like thing I'll add in just for clarity is at one point you were talking about increasing the weight. And yes, of course, that's the long-term goal. But just to be really, really clear, and maybe you were clear enough, some days you're going to have lighter days with bigger sets because we are working on that muscle endurance. We're kind of looking at all the variables that go into how we get stronger, right? And I think the other piece of talking about progressive overload that people sometimes forget is some people will just get into a groove and they're fine and comfortable with it, where they're like, this is the amount of reps and sets I do with these dumbbells or this amount on a barbell, and they just kind of want to stay there. But what I think people don't know is that we stop making adaptations physiologically when we stall ourselves out. And I think people get really confused because they're like, well, I don't have aspirations to lift this heavy weight, but that's where my body's gotten. And it's like, yeah, you got to reconcile with that. You've got to make peace with that. Like many of us, I think, are very proud and we find ourselves wanting more. And yet there is a whole bunch of women who are still trying to figure out, okay, you ushered me into this world of strength training and I get it, I know why, but there are these mental barriers that get hard to jump over. But it all kind of ties into this idea of progressive overload and really understanding it.
Yeah, and I think the training to failure is something that is very foreign to a lot of people, to really get a good progressive overloaded stimulus, right? Like, and well, like I said, like the methodology behind our group class training is cycles based. Like I'm not just writing a workout and putting it in the system and hoping that everybody gets a good sweat. I'm not just taking a lift and like throwing it like, let's try this rep scheme today. It is very like progressive in the intention behind everything that I'm putting into that workout. So taking people from this point to this point is the goal. I don't know what those different points are. It is very individual, but being able to, use either rate of perceived exertion, or meaning like how hard this feels day in and day out, day to day, or using specific percentages based on, this is what your 2-rep max is. I want you using 55% of that. The science-y side of taking people through an intentional training program in a way that you're educating them on how to actually increase your strength nor does it mean that you're going to increase your muscle size. It's just we're increasing the stress on the body. Your body is smart. Your body is going to adapt. Your body is going to continue to evolve if you're fueling appropriately, obviously, and if we're doing all of the things. I think all of us reach a point where like chasing a PR is really hard, like where we've kind of found that baseline of like, okay, like I can't really progress right now. Or it's going to take a lot more food, or it's going to take a lot more intense stimulus. And that's kind of like that sweet spot where we can get creative in different ways and have some fun with it. But when you've trained your body to get to that point, you are carrying enough muscle mass on your body where you're doing really well. But most people don't even train hard enough to, or more intentionally, I should say, enough to get to that point.
Yeah. And I like that you corrected yourself there with harder to intentionally, because I'm at a point in my life where I'm starting to really choose my words more carefully in that regard, because I have been, and many people I know have been, that person that trains harder and harder and harder. But that doesn't always get you there, because you hit a place where harder or more isn't necessarily better. And that's where learning how to recover becomes key, and how much intense strength training, meaning to failure, versus how much high intensity interval training or whatever it is actually fits into your week without creating too much stress that you can't recover from it.
Yes.
And just purely speaking about the aging process, right? Like you're working with the full spectrum from young adult all the way through the lifespan, and our needs are going to change, which you're addressing. Our abilities are going to change. And I'm going to like zip over into the CrossFit terminology and talk for a minute, and then I'm going to ask you about that. But just bear with me for a minute in case this doesn't resonate with you, but I think it does. You know, when you do your CrossFit level 1 training, they have this beautiful graph that like, it just becomes incredibly memorable. And that is it goes up, 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 up. You're climbing as you get better at everything. And that's coming from technique. It's coming from strength. It's coming from metabolic training. But simply, again, aging process, you're going to hit a point where you plateau. And then our job becomes not to fight it and find some magical way to keep getting stronger, even though we're getting older. It becomes staving off the decline by holding your plateau. So now you see a line that just goes straight across with no change, and you want to hold that for as many years as you can, and then acknowledge that there's going to be a decline. And I just last weekend sat around watching the Masters athletes at the CrossFit Games. And boy, did that really start to make sense for me in a whole new way. I watched like 75-year-old male athletes like lifting weight that was insane to me, but knowing that that was a huge reduction for them in their life cycle. Watching the age at which they took muscle ups out of the equation, for example, right? Like all the things that were shifting for people because of the aging process. And it was sad, but also inspiring all at the same time, if you know what I mean.
Yes, absolutely.
So on that note.
I do. Yeah, I think that's where I would say that like that third pillar of the Victress methodology, you know, we talked about strength, we talked about, progressive overload as a component of that strength training side of things. We talked about that cycle-based programming, meaning I'm not just like, you know, we run anywhere between 8 to 16 plus week cycles of programming, meaning like we're going from this date to this date, and this is the goal, this is the intention of that program. Whether that's to increase your aerobic capacity or, you know, a true strength cycle or whatever it may be from throughout the year, you're going to expect 5 different ones from me. So that's like another, you're not just coming in here to get a sweat. We're training. There is an intention and an intentionality around every single workout that, you know, as long as you continue to show up as your best self and being honest and true to who you are and what your capabilities are, whether that's from a I need to push to a I need to hold back perspective, we should see results within that range. But then, you know, the other side of that is the stage of life. And I think, you know, when I said women's gyms, there's a lot of women's gyms, there's a lot of women focused stimulus, but the stage of life component is what really I think makes us very unique in regards to intentionally shifting all of those same values and all of those same goals to fit the stage of life as a woman. Our bodies are so secular and change secularly, meaning like month to month, and, you know, from a hormonal cycle, from a menstruation cycle, especially once we start. And I would argue even like post-menopause, we may not be having those hormonal fluctuations as much, but we're still like innately, we've been cycling for this long. It's just like an innate part of who we are. So yes, like day to day we have that, but also stage of life changes, right? Like if you decide to become a mom and you decide you want children, you're going into that prenatal stage of life, and then you're coming out and you're postpartum, and then you're going back and potentially back into a prenatal stage of life, and then you're coming out and you're postpartum. There's a stage of life around preconception, you know, some of the exercise recommendations around trying to get pregnant or work if you're dealing with fertility issues. Like there's some, you know, research and stuff that we can help support within the exercise space there. You know, the young athlete demographic, I think so much of that is just learning your body and understanding your body, understanding your hormonal fluctuations, understanding your Q angle changes, meaning your hips widening, and how can we help support and mitigate some of those ACL injuries based on just your hips widening, and how do we support that hip change. So many trainers just like don't talk about that or don't really hone in on that with these young girls. And, girls are leaving sports in the masses during that time period where they're starting their period because of a lot of different things. But one of that being that injury side of things, like, it's sad to see. And then again, we could go into prenatal postpartum very in depth, but the intentionality needs to shift when you're pregnant. It's not a you're weak. I would argue, physiologically speaking, you're the most fit you would ever be in your life while you're pregnant. Meaning your VO2, your ability to, create quality muscle fibers, your HGH in your body. Like, there's just human growth hormones present. There's so many different things that make you metabolically like fit and effective just by being pregnant. But when you add exercise into that, it's like a whole new ball game in regards to a woman's capacity there. And then postpartum, I think our Western culture has completely backwards, which I'm sure you are very aware of. The intentionality behind postpartum needs to be slow and intentional and rehabilitative. It's an injured state, in my opinion. It is an injury that you are now, having to navigate, and you should be given resources to help with that. And you should also be giving appropriate exercises that ease you back into whatever you want to do, not a 6-week checkup, check, you're good to go.
Hey, just pausing for a minute because I want to add to this. I have a feeling that some people listening might have heard Stacy comment on pregnancy as a state of injury, and that may have hit you in a way that isn't what's intended. I want to say, first of all, I completely agree with her, but I think that language is incredibly challenging for those people, and that includes myself, who may be listening, who come from the birth world, because we think about birth as a normal physiologic process, and we don't want to see labor and birth as something overtly dangerous or harmful or anything. And that word injury kind of gets, tied up in that thought process. But this is different. I think when we talk about recovery from pregnancy, from birth as injury, what we really mean is not that anything wrong necessarily had to happen. Someone could have the truly perfect pregnancy, labor, birth, and they still need to recover from all those bodily changes that changed their body. And we do that in a way that is akin to how we go to PT and recover from an injury. So none of that commentary is to say that there's something inherently wrong with normal, healthy pregnancy. And I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
There's a lot of other things that need to happen and should happen along the way. And then, just overall general fitness is kind of where I see that, like, okay, I'm done having kids, but I'm not quite perimenopause. Like, what does that space look like? What do we do with ourselves in that space? And that's just like that hormonal fluctuation, being aware of the hormonal fluctuations in our body from month to month, optimizing. I wouldn't say that we necessarily support like cycle-based training, meaning like you're going to change what you're doing based on where you're at in your hormonal cycle. But we do take a very like individualized person approach. Like, there is a fluctuation. We see it. We take an evidence-based approach here. We see a performance change based on kind of where they're at in their cycle, but that can vary. And there's a lot of things that can change. So we're not going to just say like, take it easy on these days. It's just bringing awareness and education and body autonomy in that space. So that's in, within those four walls. And then perimenopause and menopause, we have a specific program for that demographic. And really what's exciting, I think, about that is I've been joking on, conversations around menopause for a while. Millennials are hitting perimenopause, and millennials are not known to be very quiet. We're kind of like, hello, something's going on. Like, this is not okay. and we're demanding more. We want to know, why are we experiencing these symptoms? Why are things changing? Why is everything that I've done up to this point in diet, exercise, stress mitigation, like all of these things, why is it no longer working? Like, what just happened? All of a sudden I'm putting on midsection weight gain. I can't sleep and I'm feeling so fatigued consistently, and all of my workouts feel like crap. And I feel like an inflamed ball of fire walking around consistently. So there are things that we can do within the exercise space to shift your training in a way to optimize those hormone fluctuations. I mean, perimenopause is just a whole thing. So there's that. And then menopause, we kind of treat the same way. What's unfortunate about the demographic that is in menopause right now is, as they're coming into our space, it is essentially introduction to weightlifting.
Yes.
It is hey, like, let's introduce you to the barbell. Let's introduce you to, dumbbells. Let's introduce you to your pelvic floor. Let's introduce you to your core. Like, let's rehab the last 30 years of your postpartum experience now, which, that just wasn't talked about. It wasn't a resource for women back then. I think it's good that they're walking in our doors and wanting to strength train. Like, we're taking a step in their quality of life getting better. But I think what's exciting, or I shouldn't say exciting, but like what's cool about maybe where we're taking things is that I've got a gym full of women that are about, average age of 30 to probably 30 to 40, maybe a little bit younger to 40, that are in there deadlifting 250 pounds. They're squatting 175 pounds. They're benching 150 pounds. And these women are getting older and they are headed towards, perimenopause and menopause with this amazing base of strength and amazing awareness of barbell lifting and how to approach those things. So we firmly believe that that menopause transition might look a lot different as women start to strength train more consistently. So yeah, that's where the stage of life component in regards to what is Victress doing different within the exercise space specifically for women.
Hey everyone, it's me, Tanya, your host here at the Mother Wit podcast. I sometimes invite my clients on the show to talk about their birth stories and postpartum experiences, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what those clients and I actually do together. I started Mother Wit to help people in the perinatal period achieve their health and wellness goals. That means whether you're hoping to conceive and struggling with high blood pressure or high blood sugar, or you're having trouble managing anxiety or depression in the postpartum period, or maybe you just need support and advocacy between prenatal or postpartum visits, I can help. Get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. I'm looking forward to working with you and maybe having you on the show too.
We hope you're enjoying the Mother Wit podcast. If you are, please rate us and leave a review in iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to your podcast. Thanks so much. Now, back to the show.
I've been jotting down so many notes furiously that I don't even know if we'll actually get back to them because I would be looping us around in circles in a certain way, but I so didn't want to interrupt you. So we'll just kind of see what happens. But I'm going to bring us back to a question I wanted to ask a while ago because I just think it'll clear some things up and then maybe we can work through some of these other thoughts that have arisen since you've been speaking. So if you wouldn't mind, I know from our conversation yesterday, you have a background in CrossFit. I can tell you have a respect for CrossFit, where it falls on the bigger spectrum. I would love you to say. But I would love it if you would tell me how what you guys are doing is or isn't essentially functional fitness or essentially CrossFit-like. I'm just kind of curious where you position yourself in all of that so that I can see it in my mind kind of in its totality. Because what I hear you describing is so deeply familiar to me, and I identify so heavily with CrossFit as the modality that I prefer the most.
No, I love CrossFit. I think that, like I said before, I've taken bits and pieces of my time as a CrossFit athlete with me. What I found within the CrossFit space was community. I found quality movement coaching. I found, the ability and the intensity that I'd never really realized I was capable of, realizing the capability of my mind to learn new things and my body to follow suit within the movement space. So there's so many amazing things that I really gained from CrossFit and that I love, but the biggest one being the functional movement aspect. So functional movement meaning like I can do this type of training and I can live my life strong. I don't need to be on a machine to increase my quad strength. I don't need to do calf raises to increase my calf strength. I don't need to, I don't know. There's nothing wrong with that strength training style. Don't get me wrong. Like you can still get very strong and still be able to live your life very comfortably in that way. But it was just the application process of, being able to pick something up off the floor that's heavy and move it to another location. Functional fitness, yes, it functions well outside the gym, but you also optimize your results inside the gym because it's a full body experience. We're not just isometric training specific muscle groups. We're using this full body approach where, when you're squatting, you're also activating your lats and you're activating your core and you're activating, even a little bit on your biceps and your triceps and like all of those things that people don't think about when you're squatting, right? You're thinking legs and maybe a little bit of core or glutes or, just so many different things. When it's a free weight, you have to control it more. Like it is not a machine.
Yes. I can't say, I want to put exclamation points all around that because that is another point that I think people don't understand who typically go to the gym and use machines. For instance, people think that we're not doing enough core in this world of, call it functional fitness, CrossFit, etc., Victress, put it all in one, bucket for a minute. Mm-hmm. Because people don't get that when you're lifting free weights, everything is a core exercise. Right? Yes. So yes, we can isolate. And that's what people don't realize is we are doing core every day, but we're doing multi-joint core movements, core to extremity movements.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I think that to your point, like the CrossFit, there are certain things with the demographic that we serve specifically in stage of life that just aren't appropriate, which we talked about before. Like, why are we doing burpees? Like, while we're pregnant? Why are we, necessarily doing kipping pull-ups before you can actually even do a strict pull-up? Like, there's just a lot of different things that I think at times and within the CrossFit space, the ego can get ahead of the performance or the performance capabilities. And so what I've done is essentially taken out all the opportunity for the ego to get into a skill set that maybe just isn't necessarily appropriate. Like, for example, handstand push-ups. Like, you're never going to see me program handstand push-ups within my gym. Do I think they're a fun movement to learn? Sure. Have I hurt my neck on them? Absolutely. I can get that same adaptation with these women in here by doing seated push press, dumbbell push press, or I can do seated just strict press, or there's a lot of other things that I can do with them in that regard that still creates that. And I think that CrossFit has become more of almost like a professional sport when we dabble into those really advanced movement patterns, right? Like it is becoming we're starting to get into like a sport training versus just like an everyday functional training.
So what else do you take off the table besides handstand push-ups since you started going down that path?
Yeah, handstand push-ups, kipping pull-ups, you're really not going to see a ton of within this space, mainly because, again, the demographic we serve from a core perspective, a core functionality perspective, a lot of them are rehabilitating or just newly starting in the gym to rehabilitate any kind of lineal elbow separation. So meaning like that diastasis recti or whatever you want to call it, like just most women, if you've had a baby, and even if you haven't had a baby, we're probably having some core dysfunction. So that kipping motion just tends to exacerbate that quite a bit. So we don't really do toes to bar or any kind of like kipping pull-up in that regard. We do a lot of pull-ups, don't get me wrong, but they're definitely not like a kipping setting.
And that's one of the biggest arguments against CrossFit, and I would fall into that category, even though I love all those high-level movements, like a lot personally, and I would have a hard time giving them up. I argue that not enough gyms program enough strict strength to justify what they're doing when
Exactly.
it comes to kipping pull-ups, chest to bar, bar muscle ups, toes to bars, etc. And I think we're putting people at risk for real shoulder injuries, let alone the women specific stuff we're discussing today.
Right.
So that's a complaint
Right.
of mine for sure. Another question for
Yeah.
you. Are your classes mixed or separated out? So I know in your various locations, of which it sounds like you're pushing around 4 locations, is it that you have a class for pregnant people, a class for postpartum people, a class for perimenopause, or is everyone together?
So it depends. The only class that we have like specific to like all by themselves is that immediate postpartum. So we offer like a workshop or like a specific like rehabilitative for a month. Like you've been cleared at 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it may be, depending on your birth. Once you've like cleared that, then we have like a month of like specific intentional core rehabilitation, posterior chain activation. So meaning glutes and hamstrings, low back, like we're trying to get those things firing and working correctly. And then a lot of like chest opening and upper back, like thoracic strengthening. So like that is our only one that we set aside by themselves. But the rest of them, it's all in one group. So what we're asking a lot of our coaches in regards to like, walking around and coaching, we debrief and talk about the group class programming. So like I said, like that five cycles within a year, like that's our core competency. Those are the things that we're doing consistently. And majority of our demographic is following that group class programming. If we have somebody pregnant, we have written a program from weeks 4 through 42 where they run over and they grab their little PDF and they choose, what week they're on, what day of the week that they're on based on their pregnancy, and they have a workout specific for that day. And then the postpartum women, we've got them after they've come out of that. Hopefully they've taken advantage of that class first and foremost, but then after they've come out of that, then we have what's called we call return to movement. And that's another month of taking what we did in that class, but adding to it just a little bit more before they're actually in that group class setting, because they do need more time to really establish like really quality movement patterns postpartum.
Excellent.
And then we also have a return to movement for breast surgery. So we see a decent amount of, anything from aesthetically speaking, breast augmentation, all the way to, double mastectomies, breast cancer. We also utilize that program within the shoulder injury space or shoulder rehabilitation space. So they kind of live together there.
That's really special. I really want to take a minute to commend you for taking that extra step. That's huge. I've never heard of someone doing that, and I'm sure people are, and I just didn't know, but I'm super impressed. I mean, normally the PTs kind of just take that burden on, and to see that extending outside of the gym, I think is so huge and so special. Wow, yeah. I'm really impressed.
Well, I mean, I guess full transparency, I had a breast augmentation myself. And so when I got done, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is not just like you just come back in. Like there is a lot that forever I have had to, since that point forward, like range of motion and, thoracic mobility. And like, there's just so many different things. And I'm like, whether it's a choice or I had to do this, I should be served accordingly in regards to this movement. Yes, thank you. It's
cool.
A cool thing.
I love it. I also just want to build on another thought that you said when we like briefly touched on girls and injury rates, particularly ACL injuries around the time of puberty. The flip side of that, I just wanted to add in for people listening, because our listeners are going to be erring towards the side of moving towards perimenopause and menopause. We see a similar thing happen in perimenopause where people have a different set of injury risk. And we're talking now about rotator cuffs and frozen shoulders, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where that piece is, it sounds like, fitting into that crowd that's in that group you were just discussing. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's because of, I think medical professionals like yourself and people that are working within women's health really like starting to articulate the benefits of hormone therapy and, mitigating some of the scare tactics that had happened in the past based on previous studies that we know now to be, not necessarily the most ideal control groups and everything else. I think that hormone therapy is going to be a huge component of like helping women with those injury risks. Just, maintaining estrogen within their bodies, maintaining progesterone, like whatever it may be. Estrogen is so vital for so many different reasons, from muscle building all the way to mental health to, cardiovascular health, like across the board. So, I think it's a service tool and an intentionality shift. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Stacy Sims. Like we do a lot of, we take a lot of her recommendations and research and are, trying it out within the space and implementing it to our capacities here.
Yep. So on that note, kind of segueing into interface with the medical community, I'm curious if you've experienced, I don't know if pushback is going too far, but I mean, it's out there. If you've experienced any pushback from particularly your pregnant population, oh, my doctor doesn't want me to do this. How are you working with or not with those people? I'm just curious what your experience is so far, since you have an established business in a community, and I'm assuming people are starting to become very aware of who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah. I think I'll preface this with,
and don't mince your words. Like, it's cool. Like, I want you to be as honest as you feel like you can be.
No, I will be. It's a matter of, I think I live in Lincoln, Nebraska, right? Like I live in the middle of the Midwest. And in regards to birth specific, and care within, I think that there are other places in this country where we're making a lot of progress when it comes to prenatal care, rights, resources, knowledge, all of those different things. Lincoln is not that. I would say Nebraska in general is not that way. We are the only state where it is still illegal for a midwife to attend a home birth. She would lose her license if she was to do that. So literally the only state. That's it. It's just us. So there is no home birth within the state of Nebraska. There's no, our birth center in Lincoln just got shut down. So now everybody's back at the hospital. That literally happened about a month ago. Wow. So it is definitely, within like the prenatal space, it's an uphill battle, for sure. I think though, where we're at an advantage in regards to like the prenatal specific training, number one, women who are already exercising, they can like, they know they need to maintain it and they want to maintain it. So they're helping us in this regard. Number two, gestational diabetes is on the rise like crazy.
And gestational hypertension.
And gestational hypertension, just overall metabolic issues within pregnancy, due to excess weight gain previously or during pregnancy are on the rise, and medical professionals are kind of sick and tired of it, to be honest with you. From the care aspect, it makes their job harder. What's a disadvantage of that is it also makes it easier to perform a C-section if so called. So, I think that is helping us in regards to them encouraging their clients or their patients to stay active. I say clients because it is like a transaction, but they're encouraging them to stay active or get active. I think that there's a lot of birth workers doing amazing things within this space, to help empower women to move appropriately. We have a great relationship with all the midwives here in town, and I hope to continue to do that in other locations as well. Midwives just tend to be a little bit more open and a little bit more, I shouldn't say a little bit, a lot more, receptive to what the mom is wanting and what the mom feels is best for her body. So it's, within the OB and like birth space, I would say it's been and will continue to be an uphill battle locally. I think, nationally it might look a lot different. But I will say within our space right now, what we have that is so unique and that I wish every gym in the freaking world could have is I have a team of 3 professionals in my space right now that serve women differently. So I have an occupational therapist that runs her own practice out like 2 doors down from me. She is certified in core and pelvic floor. She does visceral manipulation. She is absolutely brilliant when it comes to any and everything, all things pelvic floor and core related, because they are together. If you were seeing a pelvic floor therapist, they should also be evaluating your core. It is a mutual thing. We also have another physical therapist. So she's an occupational therapist. Our physical therapist is specific to musculoskeletal. Dry needling is her jam. She's one of our coaches.
Nice.
So she's just like super immersed and a huge resource for these women because she knows the programming. She knows what we're doing. She knows how to like help things along the way. And same with, our occupational therapist as well. And then we have a registered dietitian also within this space. And specifically, this registered dietitian has really taken it. And when we first aligned, I'm like, I want you, like, navigating women specific nutrition in stage of life specific is new territory. Like, the research is kind of there, but it's not at a level where we could say, okay, like, this is, bread and butter. We can write the book here. Which it's always changing anyway, but she has taken that under her wing and has really run with that in her own private practice and really is launching just an amazing resource for our members, but also just for her clients in general. And then we just recently added in a Pilates instructor. So she's going to be also like teaching Pilates out of another room here. So we have not only internally aligned with very passionate, stage of life resources, women's health resources, but obviously also in the community. Like, there's a lot of pelvic floor therapists that we're super excited about. We used to have a chiropractor within this space as well. She, lives in Omaha now, but that uniqueness and aligning with quality professionals that really, there's a ton of quality professionals out there. I don't want to say that there's not, but professionals that are committed to growth, that are committed to continuing education, that are committed to listening to their patients and advocating for their patients in a way that, they're not getting dismissed or gaslit and being told that their symptoms are just normal or a result of being a mom.
Right.
So.
Well, I'll put in a quick little shameless plug. I want everybody to know this exists. So 2 things. I mentioned in I believe the intro of your first episode that I co-authored a chapter in a medical textbook on exercise in the perinatal period. I linked to that in the show notes in your last episode. I'll put it again here for the healthcare providers that have library access or are in the market for an updated new textbook on prenatal and postnatal care. It's in there, and I think it is incredibly unique and one of a kind. I also created an online sort of version of that course through a company called Empowering Midwifery Education. That'll be in the show notes also. It's always in the show notes. And that course is called Exercise in the Perinatal Period for Healthcare Providers. And I basically give you, as a healthcare provider, all the tools that you need to have an intelligent discussion with your clients and understand what they're talking about when they come in talking their gym lingo. It doesn't expect that you yourself do those things, but it would help. And included in that, it links you out to my YouTube channel with my movement playlist where I talk through a number of movements so that you don't have to feel like you have to do it. You can just send them the link. Give them the link to the playlist and then set them off and running. You can tell them to reach out to me or anyone else out in the world who's doing this work. So I think that's sometimes where we're running into trouble is, aside from the providers that exist that are not interested or don't want to be updated or whatever, right? Every profession has this range. So you've got those people. Let's forget about them. But then what we've got next is a huge group of people who are just overburdened. And I understand that deeply, where you're saying, I do want to know more about that, but I only have so many hours in the day and I can't. And so my approach with this course and the chapter in the textbook was just to give you the nuts and bolts of what you need to do better, to not discount people, not say what people have been saying for all of time, like, oh, that's just normal, just let it go, or that's not important. Right? Like, I mean, I can't tell you how many people of my clients when I'm wearing my fitness hat, no one even checks their diastasis. And when they do, it's clear from their recounting of it that they just kind of did it rudimentary way because the client asked for it. And I can tell from the replay that they didn't put any real effort or skill into how they did it. So now I'm sending them off a video saying, this is how you can do this yourself or have somebody do it for you, whatever the case may be. So I'm rambling a bit, but it's because it's so important for me to think about who's sitting here listening to this, and whether you're a pregnant or postpartum person or a woman not in healthcare, you need to know what's out there, and that there's a whole world of people like Stacy, like myself, who are like dying to help you. And then on the flip side, if you're a healthcare provider listening to this and you're like, I do want more information, and this episode maybe inspired you, like, I've got a couple tools just waiting for you that are affordable and that can get you from point A to point B.
Yeah, I think it's true. Like it resources, and like being humble enough to know what you don't know, and being hungry to like learn more is such a huge part of just, I think, my core values. I always joke, like, I don't like the word expert. Like the word expert freaks me out, because I feel like that means I know it all, versus like I'm in a learning phase. And I think that's something that I always want to strive to be, is always learning. But I mean, we don't know what we don't know. And like our specialty is, my specialty is fitness. Your specialty is midwifery and fitness. Like there's so many different components. But what I am trying to do within this space is not only support those professionals that want to be a quality resource for their patients, but also empowering women to walk into those rooms with the right set of questions and the right set of demands. Yes. And the right set of, expectations, that they are represented in the research of these recommendations, that they're represented across the board within those spaces. Is this medication, has this been tested on me? Is this, am I represented in this recommendation? Am I represented in all of these different things? And when you challenge professionals on those types of things, they're not always going to love that necessarily. You might be accused of Dr. Google a little bit here, but there is a gap in women's health. We know that. There is a gap in women's health research. We also know that. So like, I think empowering women to just be aware of the gap first. Second, get in there and start asking the tough questions that the resources that we have. We just had a workshop here in the gym just a couple weeks ago specific to perimenopause, and I had a women's health professional. She's a nurse practitioner that's worked within breast cancer, rehabilitation, you name it, hormones, like all the things. She just opened up her own practice, and she is so busy. She's waitlisted 60 patients deep at this point. Oof. So it's just, she's one person. She can't do it all. She can't see all of these women within this space. But we had this, amazing workshop. We talked about hormone therapy. We talked about how exercise should shift and change within perimenopause to help support hormone fluctuations, whether you do hormone therapy or not. And then it was like, we sat there and like, well, now what? Like, she doesn't have the capabilities to see all these women that are sitting in this room. They need to know the right questions and get into those rooms. And the practitioners, I think what's shifting is like women are like demanding that we actually get some information versus like, oh, that's normal. Okay, common, not normal. Like this is not something that we should have to live with the rest of our lives. Right. And demanding blood work differently and demanding like these different things. And I think the way forward, if practitioners are really smart, and I think there are a ton of them out there, like you said, that want to learn more, but I think being able to lean into learning more to serve every stage of life is going to serve them better, because I mean, like for example, she's booked crazy. Like she doesn't have the capability to take on more. So women around the world, like you and I, outside of our hats, need to also be advocating for ourselves and the women around us consistently, because that's the only way that the research is going to start to increase and change.
What a great note to end on. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. This was like just indulging me. I hope that our listeners find value in this, because I had a ton of fun. As we wrap up, I made a mental note that in your first episode, there were two things that I explicitly said, let's put a pin in, because I wanted to make sure that we came back around and talked more about them. But because of the 2-episode thing, I worried that they could get missed. So I just want to point out that those two things got covered in this episode. And they were, we talked about stepping out of class to train based on where you are in life. And it's interesting to me, as Stacy elaborated on the Victress model, that's exactly what she has her pregnant people doing with that PDF that goes from week 4 to week 42 and that whole bit, right? So just putting that example with that to make it real. And the other thing that we talked about a little bit more today that we put a pin in was what to do with your ego. And we've talked a lot about that. And Victress has a very clear way of addressing that. It's not what I want for myself personally, because I want those movements, right? But I do 1,000,010 other things to make sure I stay safe while doing those movements. And I know a day is going to come where I don't. But why I do those things isn't necessarily about ego in the class. And I want you guys to just think about, where does ego come into this for you? And for many listeners, ego is not part of the equation. I'm going to take that back. It's different for people. Yeah, you're nodding, because for some people, ego is, I need to be slim and not have any body fat. And for other people, it's, I need to be able to do this skill, right? And I almost got tunnel vision on, I need to be able to do this skill, because that's the world I'm in. Yeah. But anyway, the long and short of it is, just think about what ego means to you, and when and where you're going to put that aside for the betterment of your whole lifespan, your longevity. So that's,
yeah, and I would follow that up. There is nothing wrong with those movements. They're fun. I used to do them all the time. It's just within our space, I have figured out a way to make things just as challenging and just a little bit safer. And so it's if you love the CrossFit methodology and you want to learn those things, I think that anybody should check out those spaces, because it's fun and there is that component to it. But at a certain point, the intentionality, and I think a lot of gyms, don't follow a progressive overload within the CrossFit space. And that's something that
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And I totally understand the choices that you've made and why. They make perfect sense to me. I really am very impressed with the way you have thought through your business model and the way you're doing things. And I will be keeping my eye on you, waiting to see you in all 50 states. I'm just so excited to watch you guys grow. It has been such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. So likewise. I mean, it's an honor to be able to, again, we could talk for hours when you talk about something that you're passionate about. For sure.
Awesome.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Have a great day. Thank you for listening to the Mother Whip podcast. If any of the issues we discussed today resonate with you or your experience, I'd love to hear from you. Leave me a voicemail at 917-310-0573, or better yet, email me a voice memo at tanya@motherwhipmaternity.com. I really want to hear what worked for you, what didn't work, what support you'd wished you had, how you got through the tough times, how you advocated for yourself, or especially any tips you want to share with our listeners. I want to hear all of it. And if you'd really like to work together, you can get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwhipmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT, 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. Okay, that's all. It's wonderful being in community with you all. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.
And remember, listeners, nothing we discuss on this show should ever be considered medical advice. Please speak to your local provider about anything that comes up in this show that resonates with you and your needs and your health care.